Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
The Trump administration has been taking aim at higher education for months now. But over the past few weeks, it's turned its attention to one university in particular, Harvard.
They're taking $5 billion, and I'd rather see that money go to trade schools. And by the way, they're totally anti-Semitic.
On Tuesday, the administration moved to cancel all remaining federal contracts with Harvard. That would effectively end the relationship it's had with the university. This came a few days after another attack on Harvard. The Trump administration took away the school's ability to grant student visas, seeking to bar it from enrolling international students.
What I'm going to lose? Dreams, hopes, and 20 years of my life coming to Harvard. And I'm not exaggerating, I planned for it for 15 years.
When the news came out on Thursday, it was total chaos for students.
That's Francesca Maglione, who covers higher education for Bloomberg.
There was a lot of confusion. Everyone had different questions. They were calling immigration lawyers. I think the marching orders were just try not to panic and don't leave the country.
The following day, Harvard sued the Trump administration for infringing on its First Amendment rights, and a judge put a temporary hold on Trump's order. It's the latest in an ongoing pressure campaign from the president on the United States' oldest university. The U.S. government has already frozen $2.6 billion in federal funding, accusing Harvard of allowing anti-Semitism on campus. Harvard has also filed suits challenging those cuts, and the Trump administration has threatened to do away with Harvard's tax-exempt status. No small thing for an institution that has a $53 billion endowment.
This threatens the very financial survival of Harvard to have all of these different levers turned off by the government.
Bloomberg's Boston bureau chief Brooke Sutherland says the outcome of this fight between the Trump administration and Harvard could have ripple effects far beyond the bounds of the university.
And so I think, that's partly why you're seeing the university take such a strong stance in terms of fighting back.
I'm David Gura, and this is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. Today on the show, what the Trump administration's latest attacks on Harvard mean for the university and for American higher education, and what could come next. Harvard is the oldest and richest university in the U.S., but Bloomberg's Boston bureau chief, Brooke Sutherland, told me that history, along with its $53 billion endowment, doesn't insulate it from the government's attacks. So let's talk about the latest salvos from the Trump administration. Over the weekend, President Trump posted on social media he's considering taking $3 billion of grant money away from Harvard, and he suggested he would give that to trade schools. Walk us through what that would mean for this institution to have that amount of money disappear.
It would be really crippling. I think we should say, too, that it's not necessarily clear that he intends to follow through on this plan of giving all that money to trade schools or what exactly that would look like. The $2.6 billion that's been frozen is primarily for research funding, and trade schools do not do research funding. And so it's not necessarily practical to take that bucket of money and put it toward trade schools. But certainly, in terms of moving forward with research projects, not having this money is material to Harvard. And we've seen projects get caught in between things like ALS research, tuberculosis research. Another professor was looking into ways to sort of mitigate the effects of radiation, which would be very important if we have any intention of getting to Mars, which is something that is very important to both Trump and his advisor, Elon Musk. The school has talked about putting $250 million of its own money towards sustaining some of these important research projects. But the federal government plays a key role in supporting this and has historically done so. And it's worth mentioning, too, that it's not just Harvard. A number of other universities have seen their research funding pulled back or under pressure from the Trump administration, which, gets into bigger questions about U.S. competitiveness and the appeal of being in America to do these research projects, particularly those that are sort of on the cutting edge and maybe higher risk, which typically thrive off of U.S. government support.
On top of these funding cuts, the government has threatened to revoke the tax-exempt status that Harvard and other schools with big endowments have traditionally benefited from.
People think of Harvard as this very wealthy institution, and it is, but that $53 billion endowment is not just this pile of money sitting somewhere that Harvard can draw on however it pleases. Much of it is invested in longer-term investments that it can't necessarily get out of quickly. A lot of it is also earmarked for specific purposes. They can't just, sort of pick and choose where they put that money and use it to plug funding gaps, which is actually why you've seen President Alan Garber of Harvard appealing directly to alumni to donate to a different kind of fund. They're calling it the Presidential Priorities Fund, and the idea would be that the money that goes into that fund, the president's office would have more jurisdiction over using that funding to sort of plug gaps as they come up. But that's a very different kind of vehicle than Harvard has traditionally used.
And Bloomberg reporter Francesca Maglione says if the government is successful in barring international students, that would also hurt the university's finances.
Most international students pay full tuition because they don't qualify for federal aid. So this is a significant blow both to their finances and to their enrollment as well.
Last week, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, sent a letter to Harvard telling the university it won't be allowed to enroll international students in the 2025-2026 academic year, and that any international students currently enrolled would lose their legal status if they don't transfer to other schools.
This is significant. At Harvard, almost 30% of the student population is international, and Harvard isn't even one of the schools that has the most. At Columbia, that number is closer to 40%. This is a big part of U.S. education. This number of international students has been growing steadily throughout the years.
In the meantime, the Trump administration has broadened its focus. Yesterday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio ordered U.S. embassies worldwide to stop scheduling interviews for student visas, effective immediately. As for Harvard's international students, a hearing on Thursday could determine how long a judge's pause on Trump's initial order would hold. Is it possible for you to kind of say in broad strokes what those thousands of students are thinking at this point, what they're prioritizing as they kind of wait for all of this to play out?
Yeah, for these students, going to Harvard was their dream. They worked really hard. It's not easy to get into Harvard. And so I talked to students that talked about how their family back home was so proud of them, how they were, everybody was rooting for them. And then to get that news on a random Thursday that you might not be able to finish your degree that you worked so hard on, paid so much money for, was devastating to these students. I talked to students that said they spent the day crying. I talked to students that had families that now had to reevaluate where they were going to live next year, what their life was going to look like next year. This is a significant impact.
While Harvard and the U.S. government wait for court decisions, the rest of the world is preparing for the fallout. How universities in other countries are preparing to fill a potential gap in higher education, and more on how Harvard is fighting back after the break. The Trump administration says its actions against Harvard are intended to hold the university accountable for allegedly allowing anti-Semitism on campus. Harvard sees this differently. Here's Bloomberg's Boston bureau chief, Brooke Sutherland again.
What Harvard has said in its lawsuits pushing back is that this is not really about anti-Semitism and is more about the government trying to assert more control over Harvard and the ways in which it manages its academic process, staffing, students, rules on campus. They say that it is a case of government overstep and infringement on their constitutional rights.
This is another difficult chapter for the university. In December 2023, its 30th president, Claudine Gay, testified in front of Congress about Harvard's response to campus protests over Israel's war in Gaza.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
I will ask you one more.
A few weeks later, under mounting pressure, Gay stepped down from the job. So Alan Garber is now the president of the institution. What has he said and done in the face of those allegations that Harvard hasn't done enough to combat anti-Semitism on campus?
It's interesting because, he's very much acknowledged that there are problems that the university would like to correct on campus and, some things that happened that they need to address. And they're trying to take ownership of that. They try to be very transparent, in terms of what has been happening at campus. They've tried to commit to, really stepping up to making it the kind of place where everybody feels comfortable to be. And so it's interesting because it's sort of a twofold dynamic. On the one hand, they're suing to prevent these actions by the Trump administration and really fighting back. But they're also saying, we agree with you to some extent that changes need to be made on campus. And Harvard would say they are making those changes.
Garber was interviewed on NPR on Tuesday, and he said he interpreted the administration's actions as a warning to other schools.
And that is how it's understood by the other leaders of other universities that I've spoken to. It is a warning. They see this as a message that if you don't comply with what we're demanding, these will be the consequences.
Brooke, what can we take away from the way that Harvard is responding to these threats from the administration?
I think it sends a message around, trying to hold the line on those values that this country considers most dear. Harvard isn't impervious to the federal government's threats, but it also is in a better position to fight back than some of these smaller schools. And so, I think there's something to that, if Harvard isn't going to push back on these kinds of demands from the Trump administration, it makes it much harder for smaller schools or those with a smaller endowment to push back. And so I do think that Harvard is setting somewhat of an example here for other schools.
A Harvard spokesperson said in a statement that the university is, quote, fully committed to maintaining Harvard's ability to host our international students and scholars who hail from more than 140 countries and enrich the university and this nation immeasurably. In its latest lawsuit, the school said without its international students, Harvard is not Harvard. I asked Bloomberg's Francesca Maglione about that. Could we talk a bit about the worst case here? I think as Harvard would see it, as other institutions would see it, certainly students would see it, that is they can't enroll. What does that mean more broadly for American higher education, to have a system that no longer welcomes foreign students, international students into U.S. universities and colleges?
Yeah, that would be devastating. American higher education is the envy of the world. If you're not in the U.S., you want to come study in the U.S. I think they enroll the largest number of international students. And also, this comes at a time where these students can't choose to transfer to another institution. Most of them have either confirmed that they're going to a certain school or denied their acceptances to other schools. So they don't really have many easy options as to what to do next. It would take schools collaborating, schools opening up applications again for them to be able to study somewhere else next year.
We're talking about undergrads, graduate students, those who are already enrolled and active in the university. What about for prospective students? What are they thinking?
Even before this news, I had talked to several college counselors that had mentioned that for their international students, they were advising them to have a plan B in case anything like this happened.
What are you seeing from countries and universities in other countries in terms of their response to this? Has there been an effect here where they're noting this and maybe opening their doors in a way that they hadn't been before?
Some universities in Hong Kong have been saying that they would be accepting more students. This is an opportunity for other countries that have been competing with the U.S. in terms of enrolling international students to attract more students that would have otherwise gone to Harvard or these other schools.
This is a story about Harvard, of course, and its future. But Harvard's impact is bigger, and its reach is much wider. Bloomberg's Brooke Sutherland says the university plays a vital role in its home state's economy, in its backyard, and all over the world.
These students don't just go to Harvard. They also, are in Boston. They contribute to the economy. They spend money on restaurants. They go out and they do activities, what have you. Many of them also stay to work at these businesses that are attracted to the talent pool that comes out of Harvard, MIT, and some of the other, top tier universities here. Or they, stay and they work on research grants, through Harvard or the, hospitals or whatever it might be, which, are under threat now from the federal government as well. The real asset for Boston and Massachusetts in general has always been eds and meds, meaning educational and medical institutions. And, this general thinking was that was sort of an impervious backbone to the economy. And that is looking riskier and riskier. If you think about Harvard as an employer, it is a massive job generator in the state, but then it's also, attracts those students. It creates a talent pool that makes businesses want to be here and invest in Massachusetts. And that's all now under threat.
Under threat as Harvard prepares to hold its 374th commencement on Thursday. Students, faculty, and administrators are acutely aware that next year's could look very different. This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm David Gura. To get more from The Big Take and unlimited access to all of Bloomberg.com, subscribe today at Bloomberg.com/podcast offer. If you like this episode, make sure to follow and review The Big Take wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find the show. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.